The film is set in the greyish skies of London in the year 1905. A ransom letter informs Thomas Richardson, a former missionary, that his sister, Jennifer, has been kidnapped. His father's secretary instructs him to save Jennifer and not pay the ransom until he sees her alive. He travels to Idyllic, a remote island where his sister is imprisoned and actively runs a mysterious cult. Rather than reveal his true identity to the town guards, Thomas disguises himself as a convert. Before riding the boat, he and the other converts form a line in a docking area while a townsman guard checks their tickets. Thomas notices a red mark that exists only on his ticket, so he senses a possible threat. After quick thinking, Thomas approaches another convert and switches his ticket with him. He gets into the boat without suspicion, while that man gets mistaken as the one who has the ransom. The boat makes its way to the religious island of Idyllic, which was founded by their known leader Prophet Malcolm along with 2 ex-convicts. Frank and Quinn. Upon arriving, Thomas studies the island and observes the quiet ambience in the community. He also notices that the town is surrounded by statues and crosses. Frank's son, Jeremy, welcomes him to Idyllic, but Thomas just ignores him. While they are walking in the village, Thomas observes Jeremy locking eyes with a young woman. She is later identified as Fionn, Jeremy's secret lover, who is also Quinn's daughter. The new converts line up as another townsman guard inspects their bodies. After the inspection, Thomas is sent to his cabin, where he picks up the Bible on his bedside and briefly goes through its pages. In the middle of reviewing the Bible, the town bell suddenly chimes, signaling the start of their worship in the chapel. On his way to the chapel, Thomas meets Prophet Malcolm's daughter, Andrea, who is also a doctor. He notices a small dirt on her cheek and he offers his handkerchief to her. Inside, Thomas finds Prophet Malcolm in the middle of delivering a sermon to the followers of Idyllic. Malcolm lectures about his past struggles of being godless, in which he has been called names such as a traitor and a radicalist. He continues, talking about how everything has changed when he, Frank and Quinn landed on the island and met the so-called goddess. While listening to the sermon, Thomas glimpses on a window, where he notices a movement from a shadow of an old woman. Malcolm then finishes the sermon by boosting the morale of the people of Idyllic, telling them that they are free men with no obligation for money, arms, and taxes. Meanwhile, the man whom the guards thought was Thomas is arrested and beaten up as soon as he arrived at Idyllic. Malcolm comes to the isolated room where the man is located. The townsman guard reports to him, saying that the man would not tell them where the ransom is. Malcolm suspects that the guard has mistakenly arrested the man, but the guard denies it and shows him the marked ticket. Nonetheless, Malcolm orders the townsman guard to kill the innocent man. At night, the townspeople hang out in a pub as Thomas carefully eyes Malcolm. In the middle of the gathering, the lovers Jeremy and Fionn meet in secret. The two make out and talk about their plans for their future while lying on a boat. Just then, Malcolm announces curfew, telling the people to get back to their cabins. Thomas peeks through the cabins and attempts to locate his sister. Unexpectedly, he witnesses a villager undergo a blood sacrifice. He steps back out of shock and sprints towards the other cabins. In another cabin, Thomas discovers Malcolm accessing a secret entrance from a wooden floor. Instead of chasing him, Thomas decides to go back to his quarters first in case of getting caught. However, he bumps both into Fionn and Jeremy, who are just returning from their secret date. Thomas figures out their secret relationship but says nothing. While he unlocks the door, a sharp edge on his key cuts his finger and causes it to bleed. A drop of his blood lingers on the floor before he enters his room, and a shadow from under the floor emerges to feed on the blood. Afterwards, Thomas tears a page from the Bible to draw a mini-map of the town. The next day, Jeremy knocks on Thomas' cabin to remind him about their scheduled construction work. In the midst of their work, Jeremy asks for Thomas's help in disentangling a boat. The two head to the seaside as Thomas seizes the chance to interrogate Jeremy. He shows Jeremy a picture of his sister Jennifer and reveals his identity to him. Jeremy denies knowing her and quickly walks away, but Thomas corners him to the ground. Jeremy is forced to admit his knowledge of Jennifer, saying that he met her while on a boat with some of the villagers. According to him, during that time, the cult has already started experiencing financial difficulties. They no longer have enough resources to support their activities, such as their continuous animal sacrifices. It was Jennifer who told them about her father's riches, which led Frank and the townspeople to kidnap Jennifer and extort money from her father. Hearing this, Thomas blackmails Jeremy and orders him to be his servant in exchange for keeping his relationship with Fian a secret. On the other hand, Fian opens up to Andrea about her possible pregnancy and calls herself a sinner. Andrea consoles Fian, saying that she should not judge herself for doing something out of love. At the same time, Malcolm summons Thomas and the rest of the citizens to the chapel. He informs the converts that someone among them has broken the rules on curfew. Malcolm orders all of them to kneel and recite the rules of Irisden one by one. Kneeling beside Thomas is an assassin who posed as a newcomer. During the assassin's turn to recite, he falls silent while slowly taking out his knife. Without any warning, he slashes the knife towards Malcolm and attempts to murder him. Thomas interrupts the assassin but ends up getting slashed and wounded. In defense, the townsmen guards simultaneously stab the assassin, who curses at Malcolm and Irisland before he dies. Malcolm immediately takes Thomas to his cabin and instructs Andrea to treat him. He becomes indebted to Thomas for stopping the assassin and expresses his gratitude to him through a blood pact. During the evening, Malcolm calls the attention of the citizens as he loudly parades Jennifer around the village. He announces that a co-conspirator of Jennifer has been hiding in the village, warning that Jennifer will be killed if the co-conspirator continues to hide. Thomas finally sees his sister from the window of his cabin, contemplating whether or not to come out. Seeing no one respond, Malcolm orders a townsman guard to point a knife at Jennifer. Jennifer screams in terror and pleads for her life while Thomas fights the urge to show himself because it is not a god time to save her. His sister's voice brings him to extreme worry and fright, causing him to break down on the floor. The next day, Fian hides inside a cubicle and takes a pregnancy test, but this is witnessed by Quinn, who peeks through a hole on the wall. He backs away from the cubicle and meets with Malcolm in the middle of preparing for the festivities in Irisden. Quinn reminds Malcolm about their financial strain, saying that the festivities in the village will wipe out their livestock. In response, Malcolm reveals his underlying plan on searching the rooms of every cabin during the festivities. They intend on finding Jennifer's co-conspirator along with the ransom money. At this time, Andrea approaches Jennifer, who is being toyed with by the village children. She offers food and a blanket to keep her warm, which Jennifer gratefully accepts. At the same time, Thomas is working on the roof of a cabin with Jeremy and sees Andrea talking to Jennifer. He tells Jeremy to be ready for their upcoming mission before he goes back to his work. The festivities begin as the night deepens. The people of Irisden gather outside of their cabins while cheerful folk music surrounds the place. Outside his cabin, Thomas comes across Andrea, who invites him to dance, but he respectfully declines. He meets with Jeremy and with his help, he hammers a hole over Malcolm's house with the secret passage and successfully enters the passage. Meanwhile, Malcolm and Quinn begin their search through the cabins and now they come to Thomas's cabin. While Quinn aggressively searches Thomas's belongings, Malcolm believes that Thomas is innocent, influenced by their blood pact. Just before they leave the room, Malcolm discovers the small map of Irisden that Thomas drew. Realizing something is wrong, they hurriedly call Frank to check on the house. Frank runs to the house and finds his son Jeremy covering the hole that Thomas hammered. Instead of arresting him, Frank instinctively pushes Jeremy to run away, preventing him from being caught by Malcolm and Quinn. Upon Malcolm and Quinn's arrival, Frank reports that Thomas, the intruder, is inside the secret passage. The three of them hurriedly chase after Thomas. Frank enters the secret passage holding a rifle and Quinn stands guard outside the house. Malcolm rides a horse at full speed and heads to the other end of the secret passage to corner Thomas. At this time in the passage, Thomas finds a canal full of blood, revealing more dark secrets of the village. He then walks further and is led towards the location of Malcolm on the other end of the passage. Just when he is about to come out of the passage, he senses danger from a sudden sound that he steps back, returning to the bloody canal and effectively hides from Frank and Malcolm. He swims through the canal while gasping for breath. Suddenly, an old woman emerges from the pool of blood and chases after him. Thomas escapes from her and finds himself in a cave full of unusual markings. He looks through the markings and discovers a drawing of a skinny woman, signifying a godly presence. After a failed pursuit, Malcolm visits a barn where an old woman, known as the goddess, is held trapped in tree roots. He asks the goddess why she is guiding Thomas because she has revealed her presence to Thomas many times. The pale old woman replies with a groan, hungry for more blood, so Malcolm feeds her using his. Behind Malcolm, a masked figure called the Grinder is revealed to have been staying inside the barn. The Grinder is in charge of watching the goddess and preparing the human sacrifices, cooking them one by one. On the other side in a cave, Thomas is woken up by Andrea, who gives him dry clothes to change to. When peeking at him, she discovers a number of scars on Thomas's back. He then explains to her that he was a former Christian missionary who led his parish into the heart of Peking, China. However, he suffered from persecution which led him to lose his faith to the divine. Thomas believes that nothing in the world is pure except for his sister Jennifer, who he vows to save. Andrea offers to help Thomas by leading him back to his faith, but Thomas refuses. He tells her that her father Malcolm is a murderer who has taken Jennifer away on purpose. Nonetheless, Andrea insists on helping Thomas as she takes him to an isolated wheat field to hide from the three leaders. Back in the village, Malcolm finds Frank on the docking area, where Frank informs him that he will be leaving the island together with his son Jeremy. Frank convinces Malcolm that their community is broken and relying on the goddess is no longer helpful. This angers Malcolm and they start arguing, but Frank remains firm about his decision to leave. At the same time, Fionn reveals to Jeremy that she is pregnant and the two share an intimate moment inside her cabin. The two settle on going against their fathers and plan their elopement. However, when Fionn is packing her luggage, Quinn catches her and forces her to an abortion. But he ends up killing Fionn when he is trying to remove the fetus from her. Jeremy comes back to Fionn's cabin only to find her lying on the floor lifeless. Quinn blames Jeremy for her daughter's death and accuses him of corrupting Fionn. As a result, Jeremy takes out the knife that Thomas gave him and engages in a fight with Quinn. Jeremy succeeds in stabbing Quinn but gets caught by the townsmen guards during their chase. While the guards hold Jeremy captive, Quinn orders them to prepare the heathen stand, a tool used to perform a purification ritual. The townsman interrupts Quinn, telling him that only Malcolm has the authority to perform the ritual. But Quinn angrily rebuts and says that Malcolm is not the divine ruler. He orders the guard to sound the bell, gathering the attention of the villagers. After Jeremy is brought to the heathen stand, Quinn begins the purification ritual. Andrea and Thomas rush to stop Quinn, but they fail and the guards also arrest Thomas. The heathen stand crunches Jeremy's bones, leading to his immediate death. All this is watched by the villagers. When Malcolm and Frank arrive at the scene, the three leaders start to clash. Quinn calls Malcolm a false prophet and criticizes his weakness. He also challenges Malcolm in front of the villagers to kill Thomas to prove himself worthy of being the leader of Irisden. Malcolm accepts the challenge and takes a knife before approaching Thomas. He points the knife close to Thomas's throat when a loud gunshot fires from a distance. It is from Frank, who is fueled by anger for the death of Jeremy and decides on killing the goddess with a rifle. Thomas takes advantage of the chaos and eliminates the guards before running away. In the midst of running, the old woman shows up to Thomas for the second time. Frank, on the other hand, is shot to death by the grinder on his way to the barn. Thomas hides from the grinder and enters the barn from an underground entrance. He witnesses the grinder feeding Jeremy's body to the goddess and finds Jennifer inside a hooked sack on a ceiling. The siblings reunite after Thomas successfully frees Jennifer. However, he gets caught by the grinder and he is locked in Jennifer's place. Quinn also arrives at the barn and takes Jennifer away. Later, Thomas wakes up and finds himself bound to a meat grinding machine. The machine cuts a portion of his hand, allowing it to be free from the chains. After much struggle from fighting the grinder, Thomas succeeds in defeating him. He advances towards the pale-looking goddess, who tells him that she has long awaited his arrival. He kneels before her and she takes hold of his head. Thomas's eyes become pale like hers after he finally accepts being her servant. The goddess shows Thomas the events that happened with the cult. It is revealed that Quinn, Malcolm, and Frank discovered the great power that the goddess holds, so they imprisoned her to manipulate those powers. Through time they were able to build the community of Irisden on the island. In exchange for plentiful harvests, the men gave her sacrificial offerings of animals. But due to the force feeding, the island's harvests have become tainted. The plants and animals in the island could no longer reproduce, resulting in hunger upon the villagers. The leaders become desperate to continue their offerings to the goddess. Eventually, they are urged to use human blood and body as sacrifice. After saying that, the goddess later holds Thomas close, begging him to free her. Thomas follows her request, taking a lantern to burn her and the whole barn. The goddess burns willingly while the process releases her from her imprisonment. Back in the village, Quinn has captured Andrea and Jennifer, imprisoning them inside the chapel. He takes credit for imprisoning the goddess, emphasizing that Malcolm is a false prophet and weak leader. He also reveals his intentions of impregnating Andrea and Jennifer time and again to supply the human sacrifices for the goddess. But he gets interrupted by a commotion from outside when the fire has further spread throughout the village. The people of Irisden evacuate their houses and head towards the boats to leave the island. Learning that Jennifer and Andrea have been captured by Quinn, Thomas comes back to the village for them. He runs to the chapel and immediately stabs Quinn on the throat before trapping him to the wall. Quinn counterattacks by slashing a knife on Thomas's neck. At the same time, Andrea and Jennifer break free from the chains by shooting at the chains using Quinn's rifle. They immediately use the chains to strangle Quinn. Thomas deepens the knife on Quinn's throat while Andrea and Jennifer drag Quinn across the floor, completely damaging his internal organs. After killing Quinn, the three of them run towards the boats as the village of Irisden burns. Thomas accompanies the two women on the way to the boats before he finally collapses. Suffering from heavy injuries, Thomas realizes that he won't make it to the boat in time. He urges Andrea and Jennifer to go ahead, and with a heavy heart, the two bid farewell to Thomas. Andrea and Jennifer ride the boat and escape the island just before the fire reaches the docking area. After a while, the crippled Malcolm slowly arrives at the scene. Thomas and Malcolm, who are both left on the island, stare at the departing boat with the people of Irisden. Despite bad injuries, Thomas sighs in relief knowing that Jennifer and Andrea are both safe. At this time, they notice small plants growing out of the blood dripping from Thomas. He bleeds on the ground incessantly as more plants grow over and around him. Vines from the ground ahead of him grow quickly on his body as he lies back on the grass. The vines then permeate his body, penetrating his face all the way to his skin. His eyes return to a pale shade that resembles the goddess's eyes. The film concludes with an overwhelming connection between him and the goddess, prompting his resurrection as a new follower and guardian of Irisden. Thank you for watching.